experience and my thoughts that have been accumulating over a number of years that I've been observing and working on the problem of the BDS movement. It's a commonplace to suggest that the BDS movement had its origins in the aftermath of the 2001 United Nations World Conference on Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance in Durban. But BDS actually has a very long prehistory that provides both a general context for the rhetoric and the ideology and specific structures, which there's a strong element of continuity going back several generations now. And these give us a better idea of what the movement really is and where it's going. So in terms of the origins, well, we have to go back to at least 1922, and that's the first Arab boycotts of Jews, Jewish commerce in mandatory Palestine. Another signpost is the 1945 creation of the Arab League, which had as part of its central focus, raison d'etre, to oppose the creation of a Jewish state in mandatory Palestine. And in December 1945, a commercial boycott of Jewish industries was instituted, which continues in one form or another, much diminished until today. Another vital foundation to the modern BDS movement, particularly in the United States, is to understand Arab-American anti-Zionism. This is the one issue around which the American Arab community, Muslim and Christian, were united from the 1920s onward. And most of the institutions that they created during that period, the Arab National League in the 20s, the Conference of Americans of Arab-speaking origin in the 30s, the Institute of Arab-American Affairs in 1945, which spawned a variety of other small groups which had support from the State Department, the CIA, Aramco, and others, the Association of Arab American University Graduates in 1967. These provide really a vital foundation for spreading the ideology of anti-Zionism and boycotting Israel and Jews in one form or another that continues till today. A very important foundation is the New Left and its role from roughly 1968 forward in shaping the intellectual and social environment of Western universities in Europe and the United States, where the personal became the political, where universities became an arena for adolescents to play out various kinds of psychodramas. The word that French sociologist Raymond Aron used to describe this outpouring of emotion. Out of this came activists who became faculty members, who became so-called tenured radicals, and who proceeded on what is called the Long March through the institutions. In the subsequent decades, the triumph of the social justice paradigm and other kinds of therapeutic paradigms, arguing for restorative justice of various kinds. Postmodernism, postcolonialism, third worldism, Orientalism, created by Edward Said, anti-nationalism generally, have created, to a surprising degree, an atmosphere of what the German philosopher Herbert Marcuse called repressive tolerance on Western campuses. Bad ideas have to be squashed. And this is very interesting because it runs counter to the neoliberal reality of American universities. American universities are among the most profitable industries in the country. They're not nonprofits, they're profit-making industries. But the humanities and social sciences are not the profit-making sector. They're the loss-leading sector of the universities, and they've been allowed to run off and do whatever they want. Whereas, and therefore it's not surprising that opposition to BDS is found most strongly in the sciences, in business, in law, in medicine. And to this we have to add the current balkanization and racialization of American politics as a whole. Another important foundation is the Jewish anti-Zionist left, which grew out of the New Left of the 1960s. And these provide very specific institutional antecedents for organizations like J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace, designed in deliberate opposition to the Jewish establishment and its consensus in favor of Israel, designed specifically to split the Jewish community and alienate its support for Israel. I'll mention only three. The Committee on New Alternatives in the Middle East from 1969 to 1975. They were in favor of Israel, and they had they came out of the Socialist Workers' Party, and there are individuals in this group who've gone on to work for the American Friends Service Committee. The Middle East Research and Information Project from 1971 to the present, they are opposed to the existence of Israel. They cooperated with the Fatah movement in the 60s and 70s, and they gave us individuals like Joe Stork, who went on to work for Human Rights Watch. The real central organization was Brera from 73 to 79, which had a rabbinical council, which focused its work on the Hillel, exactly like J Street, Open Hillel, Jewish Voice for Peace do today. All of these originated actually from the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a pro-communist think tank, so-called, in Washington, D.C., and the circle around Rabbi Arthur Waskow. And the Institute for Policy Studies is one of the central institutions today for BDS. We can add a number of other things. Soviet anti-Zionism, which gave us the specific rhetorical concept of Israel as the apartheid state, which reached its apotheosis in the 1975 United Nations resolution, Zionism equals racism. Another important foundation today is the United States Muslim Brotherhood Network. Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928, revitalized by Saudi support in the 1960s and 1970s. The first Muslim Student Association was created in 1962 at the University of Illinois. It's classified still today as a church, by the way, by the IRS. And the dramatic expansion through the 70s and the 80s of organizations which have monopolized and unified American Muslim life. The North American Islamic Trust, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Association for Palestine, the Muslim American Association, Muslim American Society, Council on American Islamic Relations, and many more. This is a unification effort, Muslim Brotherhood, to bring American Muslims into line, to expand and direct the course of American Islam. Students for Justice in Palestine has essentially been taken over as a Muslim Brotherhood project starting sometime after 2002, 2005. Another foundation, United Kingdom antecedents. 1982, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign was created. The Palestine Return Center in 1986. Many of which grew out of the British Communist Party and the British Socialist Workers' Party. Today, in Britain, what we see is an alliance of Muslim Brotherhood activists and socialists, communists. There's a vast array of mostly Sunni, but also Shiite charities, social welfare organizations, educational organizations, which have permeated deeply, deeply, deeply into British institutional life, not least of all universities. You have the American Friends Service Committee, which since 1967 has had a veritable obsession with Israel, and which is now an organizational leader of BDS in this country. You have Palestinian University Politics, which created something called the Graduate Union for, the General Union for Palestinian Students in 1959, which was the incubator, the cauldron for Palestinian political leadership on campus and off campus. And the absolute politicization of campus life, curriculum, through this and other organizations, which were associated over time with various Palestinian factions, the left, then the Pan-Arabists, and most recently with the Brotherhood, that is to say Hamas. Palestinian universities were and are mechanisms for nationalization, and Palestinian students abroad were and remain an extremely important part of that nationalization process and the revolutionary process. All of which is to say that the Western universities and societies and their adversaries, their agonists, were pre-adapted to BDS long before Durban. Durban happened in 2001. British academics called for a boycott of Israel in April 2002. French academics in December 2002. Palestinian academics in August. The Palestinian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel in 2004. The British Committee for Universities in Palestine, which is the British leader for academic BDS, I think in 2004. These built on the General Union of Palestinian Students, which was present in the United States since at least 1973, which developed into Students for Justice in Palestine in 2002, probably at San Francisco State University. Al-Auda, the Right to Return Coalition, which was created in 2000. The Palestinian BDS Conference in 2007, the National Committee in 2007, and so on and so on. There are deep and very wide foundations for BDS in this country. So let me just describe very briefly, in the few minutes I have left, what the active components of BDS are in America only today. First and foremost, you have the Muslim Brotherhood Network. It's the interlocking directorate of the Islamic Society of North America, the Council on American Islamic Relations, Muslim Student Associations, which share and rotate staff. They share and rotate offices, post office boxes. American Muslims for Palestine is the immediate sort of administrative body behind National Students for Justice in Palestine. There are somewhere in excess of 200 chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine. They work together with Muslim student associations. There's a kind of what's called written entryism. Student gets onto university student government, and they begin to get their friends on, and they shunt the money into their pet organizations. Sometimes there are part-time students who are full-time activists. This was a pattern that goes back in Europe to the 1960s with the Muslim Brotherhood. There are indications that that exists today. We don't have a good picture of that. There's a new series of lawyering up efforts on the part of Students for Justice in Palestine and its associated organizations, namely the Palestine Solidarity Legal Support, which works with the Center for Constitutional Rights and the National Lawyers Guild, far-left, socialist, crypto-communist kinds of organizations. But to a large, surprising extent, the whole effort is propelled by American Muslims for Palestine, which is a Muslim organization. Then you have far-left organizations. There's the U.S. campaign to end the occupation, which was created in 2001, which fundraises as Education for Just Peace in the Middle East. This is a coordination body which represents national and local organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine, CARE, Jewish Voice for Peace, Middle East Children's Alliance, International Solidarities Movement, the American Friends Service Committee, the National Lawyers Guild, Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, International Socialist Organization, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and so on. There's a steering committee, you get elected to it. They do lobbying, even though they're a 501c3 charitable organization, but they're also something called a 501h, which is very mysterious. Their president is Phyllis Bennis, who is a member of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. You have the American Friends Service Committee, which has a budget, which is classified as a church, has a budget something like $150, $160 million for all of its global activities, but which has had a central, actually obsessive anti-Israel focus since 1967. They work with JVP, they have the We Divest campaign, they have a summer BDS leadership campaign with JVP. They support the Kairos Palestine Presbyterian Liberation Theology document. They do grassroots training with Code Pink, with Adala New York, with other groups. And they have a vast reach through their schools, through their various fellowships, and they have a kind of name recognition because they're the Quakers. There are foundations, there are left-wing foundations like the Westpac Foundation of White Plains, New York, which is the fiscal sponsor, which is some sort of phony baloney IRS category of National Students for Justice in Palestine, and also Al-Auda, also Israel Apartheid Week, and they provide in-house support. You have the Cultures of Resistance Network, which also supports If Americans Knew, the Israel Committee Against House Demolitions, Code Pink. You have the Benjamin Fund, which is run by Medea Benjamin, founder of Code Pink, who used to be known as Susie Benjamin. The Lynn Handelman Foundation, which does business as the Tilt Left Foundation. The Spark Plug Foundation. You have other private charitable givers. You have other charities like the Middle East Cultural and Charitable Society, which funds the Electronic Intifada website and the Chicago and Boston Palestine Film Festivals. You have lawyers, a large cadre of Palestinian-American lawyers who have rotated between a variety of organizations. The PLO Negotiations Advisory Unit, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the National Lawyers Guild, now SJP's legal arm, the Palestine Solidarity Legal Support, and which cultivates new lawyers through the National Muslim Law Students Association. You have the Jewish far left, Jewish Voice for Peace, which works with Sabil, Electronic Intifada, and many, many other groups, which even has a rabbinical council, so-called. Although its leader, Grant Rosen, took a job last year with American Friends Service Committee to head their anti-Israel operations. You have the Open Hillel movement, the American Jews for Just Peace, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, they're really kind of far out there. You have far-left academics, the U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which was founded in 2009, which is sponsored by Al-Auda, and which follows the Palestinian call, and they a small group, relatively speaking, probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen at the most, individual scholars push BDS resolutions in all of the associations, American Historical Association, American Anthropological Association, and so on. Strong overlap with anti-American faculty members. And there's a strong campus intimidation factor. Empirical research that was done in the last decade by the Institute for Community and Jewish Research suggested that there's a hardcore of maybe 8% of diehard anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-American faculty members on campus. And they have a dampening effect on pro-Israel voices. There's the Christian far left. American Protestants have had a strong antipathy to Zionism since the 1930s. The Palestinian liberation theology was designed specifically to challenge Christian Zionism and split liberal Protestants and now evangelical Protestants from support for Israel. The Kairos Palestine document from 2009 is classic Christian supersessionism. The Jews have given up their position as God's chosen people, and the Palestinians have been essentially anointed as the next group. And this has permeated through the Anglicans, the Methodists, particularly in the UK, but increasingly in the US, Presbyterian Church in the Presbyterian Church in the US since 2004, the Quakers, the World Council of Churches, a variety of other European churches. Then there are grassroots organizations, so-called real grassroots organizations and astroturfed grassroots organizations. There are all sorts of independent initiatives like the Palestine Freedom Project, which is actually a side project of a former International Solidarity Movement individual who now works for Jewish Voice for Peace. They sponsor tours by Omar Barghouti and Ben White. A million different local Palestine solidarity committees, the origins of which are quite mysterious. On the European example, in the 60s, Palestine solidarity committees and groups were set up by Palestinian students, part-time and full-time. And finally, we come to the role of West Bank Palestinians. What is well known is the role for NGOs, so-called, like Adala, Badil, Al-Haq, Al-Mizan, Gisha, Zochrot, and others in conducting a variety of lawfare and propaganda activities against Israel, mostly with European government, church, and NGO support. What we don't know are the connections of these to the Palestine Liberation Organization, in particular, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In this, we return to the question of the Islamization of Palestinian politics, Fatah, certainly since 2000, and Hamas. So let me conclude by saying, is BDS a deliberate Palestinian strategy? Yes. Is it an opportunistic evolution? Yes. The long-term demographic changes in the United States as a whole and at universities bode very poorly for the continuation of any sort of Jewish power as universities in particular become, let's call it, Palestinianized, where identity politics centered around specific political issues become increasingly the litmus test for the left and set the tone for the campus as a whole. My estimate is that we're 5 years away from a situation similar to what we see in the United Kingdom, which is one of pervasive intimidation and harassment of Jewish students and the marginalization of Israel and pro-Israel faculty.